The biggest factor that hinders my communication with patients is when they come in and they're from a different country. It's really hard for me to be able to communicate effectively with them when I can't understand their language or if they have a really harsh accent. And I think sometimes it's hard for the patient to understand me as well. On top of that, these cultures that come into the clinic, they have different beliefs, emotions, and nonverbal cues that they can display. And this is not easy for someone like myself to pick up on, especially when I'm meeting the patient for the first time. I do recognize that this is something that I can develop over time and work on, but in most cases it's hard to because we're not with our patients that long. Usually they're in for 2 or 3 months, and it's hard to establish a strong comfort level with the patients. I was reading in the book that in some cultures the idea of pain is discouraged, and these patients come in and they don't show any emotions even though they may be suffering from pain. I think that's interesting for the clinician to have to work around and realize that if you're dealing with a patient that is from a culture like this, how do you set up your plan of care and interventions if the patient is not showing any signs of pain? Another factor that affects me when I'm communicating with the patient is the idea of distracting patients. I find it really hard to be an active listener, like the book talks about and emphasizes being when working with patients, because when you have a patient that talks too much, they usually are asking you questions, and it's hard for you to keep an eye on them with their posture and the way they're doing their exercises as they're going through each exercise you're asking them to do. And it's hard for me to kind of think of the answer as they're asking me questions and I'm trying to do so many things at one time. So I think that's a hard thing for me to go through. The next thing that I would say is communicating with staff members. I find that in my clinic specifically that I'm working in now, nonverbal communication is huge, and sometimes things get passed from my boss to another PT to a PTA, and then finally you'll hear it from the PTA. It's kind of like a chain of command. The boss just can't go right to you, which I don't understand. I feel like communication is one of the biggest things that clinics need to have in order to have a healthy running clinic. Another communication barrier that I have kind of realized being a certified athletic trainer is the communication between the physician and you as a clinician. Trying to get a hold of them. I know they're very busy, but it's really difficult if you have a patient who you want to review their case. I work with athletes all the time, and the athletes are surpassing the protocols by weeks at sometimes. And, how do you establish a fine line with these protocols that are not necessarily patient specific, but you want to make your rehabilitation specific for the patient versus these protocols that the doctors are giving out and would like you to strictly follow? I feel like that's a big communication barrier, and that's something that can be looked at and worked out as well in the future.